a busy day to say welcome here to our home. You know, the Menominees, they've been on this part of the earth in this place for thousands of years. And so we're one of the more fortunate tribes in regards to being able to say that we're still living on our original homelands. And so, you know, we're really proud of that fact. And we try to be a good host, and we try to be warm and welcome to the guests that come here, because we want things from them, you know. We want them to come back. We want them to bring programs. We want them to bring services. You know, we want them to bring technology, those kinds of things that we need to move ourselves forward in this new day and time, I guess I would call it. And so really excited about, you know, today. I know sustainability is one of the things that the Menominees have been about forever. You know, wise use of resources, you know, don't overuse, don't deplete, and things of that nature. And our forest is a great testament to that. But now we're venturing down some new paths, and food sovereignty and sources of healthy food for our people is really a critical commitment that we made a few years back when we started our Department of Agriculture. And then we're fortunate to have some grassroots nonprofit kind of work, you know, that I say are the warriors. They're the ones that are out there getting the work done. And so when them buffalo do come, they're going to have people in place to manage that and to make sure that we have a successful program. You know, so really looking forward to that. I just want to make sure and recognize Guy, recognize Gary for the work that they're doing. You know, and it just can't happen fast enough, I guess, is how I feel about it. But we're also entertaining some sustainable energy kind of programs. So our goal is just to be that sustainable, not dependent on the bigger society. You know, we be able to depend on ourselves. And so we're making those steps, I guess I would call them. And once again, just wanted to say welcome to our home. You know, I hope you enjoy your stay, and I really hope that you come back, you know, and take a look at what's going on, and, you know, and maybe take a look in the rearview mirror and see what's happened as well. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Gary, and one more time, appreciate you all being here. Waiwanan.
Okay, well, Waiwanan, Chairman Corn. Several years ago, the Menominee Nation had discussed the idea of looking at food sovereignty. As a former chairman, I had traveled the country, and I saw tribes that really had their act together. They really had food sovereignty in mind, and they had developed food systems. They had looked at really doing things the right way. And I was reminded by our elders that you don't truly have sovereignty unless you can feed yourself. Well, we couldn't feed ourselves. What exemplified that was the pandemic. When the pandemic hit, we knew a lot of the farmers then could not sell their product to hotels, to restaurants, to schools, and we saw that terrible scene of milk being poured down drains. We saw food in the fields that was starting to rot. Well, then the government said, we'll buy that and we'll give out food boxes. So as the food boxes come out, we noticed that our elders, those same ones who were struggling the most with COVID, could not eat much of that food because of that high prevalence of diabetes, heart disease, hypertension, you go through those, the shortened lifespan. So we needed to look at something, and we were struggling to try to find foods that we knew, or a process to get good food to our elders, because the food boxes, as much as we loved those that were coming from the government at the start of the pandemic, just couldn't be eaten by our elders. Our doctors told them, you shouldn't be eating that food. We went and we struggled to try to find a funding source to be able to put together boxes of food that we knew the elders knew how to eat, knew how to cook. They recognized the food, and we knew it was good, healthy food. We knew what went into it. So you're going to hear today some of the stories that talk about this is how we intentionally and purposefully looked at developing the Tribal Elder Food Box Program. We had worked through the Farm Bill to look at being able to supplant ourselves through what they call that 638 self-determination process, to be able to purchase food from indigenous vendors to replace foods that already are on the shelves here. And of course, we succeeded in the Farm Bill for that piece, and we're in a pilot right now with Oneida. There are only 7 pilot programs from the Farm Bill currently in place. We are jointly in a program with Oneida. So we're looking at, and people are seeing that this is exactly the way it should happen. We look at the tenets of food as medicine. We look at shortening the food chain and really developing a system here that can have less of a carbon footprint. We're trying to make those types of moves. And slowly but surely, we are seeing that happen. We are looking at the local food purchasing assistance agreement, and we are looking at funding to help us push this type of movement forward. And the long-term project we are looking at is the potential for an indigenous agriculture cooperative, because we need to really be able to produce those types of foods, and we need to look at a tribal food system that we control, that we know the foods people can eat. So we're in that step right now, and we welcome you here. This is completing the 2nd year of the Tribal Elder Food Boxes, and later on, after this initial press event, you will be able to talk to individuals that receive food through this project. And at 1 o'clock today, we actually have the next round of Tribal Elder Food Box distribution coming forward. So I'd like to thank all of our partners that we've had with this. We've learned so much from our partners. And the first one I'm going to call up, who really helped us with that initial first-year funding, in dealing with, we had our initial concerns, and we said, we got to get better food. We got to get culturally relevant foods. And the executive director of Feeding Wisconsin, who just happens to be sitting here, Stephanie Dorfman, said, let me make some calls. Let me see. This really, in that bigger picture of equity, is exactly what we are looking at. And let's see if we can find that funding to help you and get started. So with that, I'd like to call Stephanie Dorfman forward. She's one of my heroes.
Thank you, Gary. Like Gary mentioned, I'm Stephanie Young-Dorfman. I'm the Executive Director of Feeding Wisconsin, which is the state association of our 6 Feeding America affiliated food banks. We source and distribute food to 1,000 local food distribution organizations across the state, like food pantries, meal sites, residential shelters, and support feeding folks in all 72 counties. like Gary mentioned, the Tribal Elder Food Box Program has been one of the most impactful programs I've ever had the experience and honor to work on. The program not only gets nutritious and locally and indigenously produced food to elders, but it puts dollars in the hands of Native and tribal producers. It's such a win-win on all fronts. And this program has become a national model for food banks who are working alongside communities and in support of communities to lead efforts around nutrition security and food equity. Like Gary mentioned, in 2021, we had the opportunity to pilot this program. It started through a grant from Feeding America National, and it resulted in 10,800 boxes that we eventually got out to folks who are part of 7 tribal nations in Wisconsin and Minnesota. This year, we had the opportunity to allocate $1 million of the governor's awarded Food Security Initiative funds through the Department of Ag, Trade, and Consumer Protection to expand this program. So what was a $500,000 program last year, we expanded to $1.3 million program, which has allowed us to distribute, and will continue to distribute through December, 25,000 boxes to all 11 federally recognized tribal nations in the state. We've also increased, so with the amount of food increasing, we've also increased the percentage of food that we're purchasing from Native and tribal producers. We went from purchasing 41% of the food in these boxes in 2021 to about 60% this year. That means through this program, we're putting about $650,000 into the hands of Native and tribal producers. This program is one of success because of the partnerships involved. We meet on a regular basis to share decision-making, to contribute to the development of the program. We've leaned a lot on the Wisconsin Food Hub Co-op to support the aggregation and transportation of this product and provide their expertise and capacity. And we receive ongoing feedback from elders. We make sure that we're putting the right food in these boxes that they want to eat and they want to be preparing for themselves and their families. Today, going out in these boxes, elders will find things like Oneida Nation farm beef, Forest County Potawatomi aquaponic lettuce, Sterling Sports winter squash, Oneida Nation, Oneida orchards, apples, Junhinquas, bergamot tea, ohilakus, corn mush flour, and other local producers are going to be represented in the produce and proteins included. We've also learned of many challenges. We can get to those in some Q&A. But one of the biggest limitations is finding enough tribal and native produced product to get out in these boxes. So with that, we've sourced some private funds to initiate a native producer capacity and investment fund. And I'm excited to announce that earlier this week, we announced 8 native and tribal producers to receive funds to expand equipment that they need to expand their production and efficiencies. So we are purchasing things like a canoe for the harvest of wild rice, a mobile range chicken coop to expand poultry production, a corn and potato planter, and other things. So in short, I'm honored to partner on these intertribal nutrition security and food sovereignty efforts, and grateful for the funding that DATCAP has provided, and really looking to how we can expand partnerships and programs like this in the future.
Thank you, Stephanie. So next we're going to be introducing another one of our partners, and he works under the direction of Governor Evers, but we know that much of the funding and much of the direction is fed forward from his staff to Secretary Romanski to make sure that some of the equitable initiatives that were intended to go to many of the different tribes and many of the different BIPOC farmers as well as communities. We know that now that Secretary Romanski has taken that charge and is working with it. Part of that evidence is in the funding. We've received the DATCAP funding for this year. A lot of that, as well as some of the technical aspects of how to do the transportation, how to do the purchasing, how to really set this up, comes from all of our partners, and a lot of that funding has to come from somewhere, and DATCAP has stepped up with several of those initiatives. So at this time, I'm going to ask Secretary Romansky, the director of the Secretary of the Department of Agriculture, Trade, and Consumer Protection, to please speak.
Thank you, Gary, and thanks to all of our partners who are up here today. We're really happy for our agency to be here to celebrate how we're working towards improving sovereignty among tribal nations in Wisconsin. As Gary mentioned, I'm Randy Romansky. I'm Secretary of the Wisconsin Department of Ag, Trade, and Consumer Protection. And we're honored to be involved in these initiatives, including efforts for tribal nations to not only focus on food security, which has come up a few times, but food sovereignty. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a bit. But we saw, Gary mentioned when COVID hit and there were some initial forays by the government, federal government created a program that provided food, but it didn't connect the dots that we're seeing get connected now. And connecting people to their food, and then also building not only a relationship, but building economic opportunity for farmers and for indigenous farmers. And so based off of what we saw with that program, Governor Evers set aside now $55 million in what's called the Food Security Program. The good news for us is that given his direction that this be utilized and that we do connect the dots, so we're connecting people to food, but we're also building relationships, we're building communities, we're strengthening the foundation of agriculture and food in Wisconsin. We were able to create partnerships, and we would not be able to do this alone, and you're seeing many people up here who are part of those partnerships, but I'm going to specifically thank Stephanie Young-Dorfman and Feeding Wisconsin for really being that connector for us. We're a state agency that is supposed to be a resource to the citizens of the state. We do that every day, but we don't have the infrastructure or the structure or the staff in our agency to make those connections at the most important level, which is communicating with communities, communicating with tribal nations the way that Stephanie and her team have. So a tremendous appreciation for that. Food sovereignty, in addition to being something that we should be striving for, is also an economic development opportunity for tribal nations. And it's going to focus on long-term prosperity. So we appreciate the continued efforts of tribal nations, organizations, businesses, and government partners who make all this possible. DACAP and Governor Evers, since he provided the funding and the direction for the program, look forward to continuing that partnership and continuing to grow. As I look at this, three words kind of pop into my head. Gary mentioned equity. It's important that we focus on equity. It's important that we focus on sustainability. We need to be able to sustain our efforts long term. And then the last one is, and I think it's part and parcel of those first two, is connected. We need to stay connected all the way through from the highest levels of state government, starting with the governor, to all of our communities and including the tribal nations in Wisconsin. So thank you for having us here today, Chairman, and Gary, thanks for everything you've done.
Thank you, Secretary. So we go now to a producer perspective. While we have many producers even here in the audience, we have one in particular that will speak today about some of the benefits and why this is important for indigenous producers. He told me yesterday not only could he fix the holes in his net, but also the holes in his boat. Well, if you saw his boat, no, he has a good boat. So Brian Bainbridge he serves several roles. He is the CEO of the Great Lakes Intertribal Council, and he may speak to that end, but specifically, he is a fisherman, and he fishes off Lake Superior. And part of the food, not only did we supplant or replace food that we were getting in our food distribution program where we had that ability to 638 our supplant, replace with other food. We got lake trout, whitefish, beautiful fresh fish, and we were using that instead. We're getting it from an indigenous fisherman and replacing the food that we were getting from, I'm not quite sure where, but this was what we were after. So at this time, I'm going to introduce Brian Bainbridge, and he's going to speak from that producer perspective on both the Tribal Elder Food Box and the related 638. Brian?
Well, miigwech, Gary. Yeah, you know, as you mentioned, I'm also wear two hats. Well, sometimes three or four, but you know, as a producer up on the Big Lake, I manage a small commercial fishery, and you know, usually when things happens and market gets disrupted, the first ones that get shut down are small tribal operations. Even though Red Cliff, where I'm from, we host the largest commercial fishery on Lake Superior, we're not truly recognized as an industry and a producer, and what our product and where it goes. And unfortunately, a lot of it wasn't staying home. Even for myself, you know, I had to find outside resources, and then the pandemic hit. And like I said, we're the first ones to be, no pun intended, to be dead in the water. But with that come opportunity, not only for the business owners and myself, and but for the community, our community in Red Cliff, and then our tribal communities, and reestablishing the importance of what we can bring to the table as indigenous producers, and reestablishing the importance to be acknowledged and recognized as that. And when we talk about food sovereignty, I'm also former chairman for our tribe up in Red Cliff, and I served side by side with Gary Bisa here for a little bit, and I remember having them conversations about food sovereignty and where we were at with our efforts. And at the time, we were just starting to break ground with our fish company that's up there, and that was part of our main focus was that food sovereignty efforts. And then, you know, how do we sustain our operations to make sure that we can bring that into the future? And it was to feed our communities, and to reach out and hopefully to make sure that our surrounding tribal communities have access to the resource. And if it wasn't for these opportunities with this, with the elder food boxes and other stuff, is, you know, we wouldn't be able to operate. We're operating at for a while at not even 50%, 25%. And for myself, you know, I still have a crew that have to take care of their families, and making sure that opportunity is there. It's, you know, I'm grateful for that. So it goes beyond just that paycheck. It's about getting that resource to the table. We talked about food being medicine. And we talked about the mold commodities, how, you know, we couldn't really call it medicine. We had, it was a little bit more toxic than that medicine. But, you know, as we go through this process and reestablish our natural foods, and getting back to a healthier way of living, we, you know, talk about, you know, being good for the heart, but it's also good for the soul, you know, especially as a producer, and you know, when we were able to do this stuff as people that are harvesting, is, you know, it talked to my crew, and it made them feel good too, because it's being localized, and we're seeing it. Otherwise, we'd see it heading out of state, and we would never know the people that were consuming our product. And, you know, as a CEO for Great Lakes Intertribal Council, helping to facilitate this stuff in the beginning was important, and making sure that, you know, we knew who was producing, and finding out just exactly what the tribes are doing. You know, it spurred that excitement, and like I said, the most important thing is it created an acknowledgement of truly what the tribes can do here in Wisconsin, and what we can produce, and how we can sustain our communities as we think about it for the next 7 generations and beyond as a people. So, you know, miigwech for the opportunity to speak and to maintain an operation to sustain our community. So, Neil.
Oh, Luann, Brian. So we go to our last speaker, and for Marlon, we're saving the best for last. He's the manager of the Oneida Nation Emergency Food Pantry. And while he has probably that closest nexus to the elders and the individuals that come in for the food, and he has that understanding of why that's important. We've asked Marlon to come forward and speak with us, and in our indigenous food sovereignty world, he will be one of those rising stars. We can see that already, and how he gets that and understands that importance. So with that, Marlon.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you for inviting me here. I've been going through a lot of growth lately. I'm just happy that people see me in this light, and the ability to come up here and share my thoughts. I come from a very cultural basis in my heart: respect, reciprocity, relevance to indigenous people. I carry it on my sleeve. And this tribal elder food box, being in my position over the last 5 years, at first it was just, let's get food to people, right? Let's just get food to people, find food, access food, make it equitable for people to get it. And then the past 2 years, kind of really sparked by the tribal elder food box, I was kind of taking steps to get equity for traditional foods to our people. I run a pantry that doesn't have red tape. It's run by the tribe. It's funded by the tribe. I get foundational money. I get grant money. I don't have to follow guidelines because the money's coming directly from the tribe. I can go buy buffalo right from our farms. I can buy the apples right from the orchard. I don't have to go through red tape or report to anybody. So it's been a real special place for me. And I had a vision that I wanted to make it so big that nobody could shut it down, and we're getting there. I've been able to move and shake a lot of things, and this Tribal Elder Food Box is a special program. I've done farmers to family food boxes. I've done a lot of different other food box programs, but being out there, talking with the elders, you can see the smiles, you can see people laughing, you can have great conversations. In just a little bit of time that they're there, you know, we're checking IDs, making sure they're tribal. And I love that you don't have to be Oneida. We get 400 boxes, and it can be any tribe. So I'm really excited to see this program expand to maybe in some urban areas. You know, Milwaukee has a lot of tribal, Green Bay has a lot of tribal people there. So you can see the growth. And it's been a special journey for me. And I just want to thank Gary again, thank everybody on the team, the partnerships. It's all about creating relationships. It really is. You know, sometimes you meet somebody you don't know why, but eventually it comes down the road. So making an impact is not for Oneida people, but the greater Green Bay area, all 11 tribes, because I know for a fact that if we work together, we're stronger together. It's kind of the Haudenosaunee values of the Iroquois Confederacy. And thank Menominee for giving us this land to move out here, 200 years ago. I think it's 200 years since this year. We just had our bicentennial, so I'm here for the long haul. I love my job. I love what I do, and I'm just going to keep on chugging along.
Well, Wagner Marlin told you he had that energy, as we all do. We have a few minutes now for some questions, and I'd like to thank everybody who's here in attendance, in person, and all those streaming online. We thank you for listening to us and hearing that story, and I hope you're enthused. We are trying to look for additional funding, additional training to keep this going while we are looking at the LFPA, the Local Food Purchasing Agreement, assistance, funding. We not only want to try to get more consistent funding, but we would like our 638 program that's a pilot right now to become permanent and not a pilot. There are a lot of indigenous producers that cannot truly expand or reinvest until they know that there is a regular purchaser for their product. Then they can truly expand, and that's a concern that we have, and we're trying to make that happen and slowly build that capacity of the farmers, the ranchers, the fishermen, and the expertise. So with that, if there's a minute left, we'd like to take some questions, if there are any.
Gary, if I could, I just wanted to make a comment in regards to my attire here. It's Spirit Week here in our community for our high school. And so today you're supposed to wear a jersey, right? And so, I just wanted to let you know that our cultural ties to our food is just that. It builds spirit within us. So not just demonstrations and not just actions, but that actual food source that we're able to attain now, that puts that life back into us, that helps us build our spirit. So I just wanted to say that much. Thank you.
Yes.
Gary, you were just talking about wanting to expand this, but you need some and funding concerns. How much of this funding for this program is directly related to COVID relief funding? And with that disappearing at some point, are there concerns about that impact on the future of sustaining this or growing this? It's a great effort. I know Stephanie has told me very enthusiastically about the progress and overcoming problems. You guys have all talked about that. But is that a very real concern that it would be hard to maintain and make this not only sustainable but grow it in the future without that funding?
Yes, that's always a concern. That's why in the next farm bill, we are looking at trying to push for more, just like the 638, the ability of tribes then to supplant or replace existing foods that we might see on these shelves, where we are able to purchase those foods and replace what was on there. And when we replace them, those like foods, we make sure that they are sourced from indigenous producers, and that they are, we don't call them organic, we call them indigenously grown, and that's very close to being the same. So we want to make sure that we have food that is unadulterated with the herbicides, pesticides, because those are what our elders tell us are coming back. As much as taking the herbicides and pesticides out of the foods you grow, our elders tell us you have to take that out of your body also, because those impact us just the way they're impacting the soils. So we need to keep this going. So we're looking at in the Farm Bill to try to make permanent this pilot for the 638 funding, and also to go beyond just trying to replace the foods that already exist, but to now look beyond what they call self-determination that allows this currently, we want to go to self-governance where we decide the foods that should be on the shelves. It might be foods that are not currently on these shelves, but that's the bureaucracy that stops that right now. And of course, with the Elder Food Box, that move we are looking at is towards the development of an intertribal agricultural cooperative. And that in itself would be that additional step that we believe at some point will bring permanency. But we look at our partners that we're working with, Feeding America, Feeding Wisconsin, DADCAP. We look at all of these, University of Wisconsin. Those entities are helping us understand that whole food system development. So we have to know transportation, we have to know storage, the pack and wash and collection areas. We have to know everything about costing, when to order, how things happen. We got to know food codes. So we are looking at having and hoping we have funding for several years as we develop this. So there are some funding sources going. We want to make sure they can keep us going until we come to that point where we indeed have our own cooperative. And of course, the Farm Bill can help us with the 638 we're thinking.
I can, good question, and just to spin off of what you said, Gary, you know, the pandemic affected everybody in so many different ways and affected supply chains and obviously humans. And we were fortunate that there was flexibility in the federal funding that came to our state, whether it's through the CARES Act or the ARPA funding, that Governor Evers could structure programs that were not only tied towards feeding people, but also, I mentioned the words connecting before, but I didn't go deeper. I'm going to go a layer deeper now. Part of that connecting is to have the food source be wherever possible a Wisconsin-based food source. We grow, produce, and process so much here in our state. That food that we might be wanting to purchase might be from just down the road. And so one of his focuses was to connect those dots and create that synergy where we were looking around ourselves to each other on how we were going to feed our communities. And we were fortunate to have that federal funding to help bridge that gap. Gary's right, there needs to be more funding down the line to kind of keep that going. The other thing I was going to stress, since you asked specifically about the Farm Bill, or maybe Gary mentioned the Farm Bill, is that the way the Farm Bill is structured is that agriculture and feeding programs are together in USDA. And that's really important because based off of the program that we've just been talking about a lot, it's connecting agriculture and food with people. And so it's really important that as the next Farm Bill comes forward, that that we advocate or we talk about how important it is to keep those programs together, because there are times where people try to separate them, and that just doesn't make any sense. Food and people and food and feeding programs should be together.
Is there any chance, Secretary Romansky, that there could be a DADCAP ask for funding, or could there be state funding requested as per the next state budget as well?
At this point, our state budget will get submitted in January of next year, so everything is being developed. Obviously, since this is a program that affects people all across our country, it's logical that Congress and USDA take a leading role in that, especially as we think about things like the Farm Bill. The Farm Bill kind of sets policy over a period of time, and it's really important as we look at a unifying opportunity. A Farm Bill does that. I will say that in his prior budget, Governor Evers had sought state funding to continue programming in this regard. That so far has not made it through the legislative process. But again, all the more reason that we're really fortunate that we had those flexible CARES and ARPA funding that came here that could help create a lot of these relationships we're talking about today.
Thank you.
So one of the other follow-ups.
Gary, if I may?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and you know, local funds go into the program and its services, and so we're all about sustainability, right? And so what we're going to do is look at making sure that we make this a priority, you know, in our limited amount of funding that we have. But for us, you know, this is critical. You know, I mean, we've come to a health crisis here on our reservation, and so, you know, for us to move forward, we have to invest, is what I always say, and then we would surely like the Department of Agriculture to be able to support itself at some point in time, but it would be critical for us to continue funding the program until that day.
With that, I'll also jump in, and I think what you've heard already is just a representation of how this is such a partnership program. We have a coalition of folks that come together on a weekly basis to talk about many of these things. Sustained funding. You know, one of the limitations is purchasing enough tribal and natively produced product for this program, and we don't want to grow the program bigger than we can be intentional about doing that. So part of that is the need for multi-year funding, the need to invest in producers, to grow enough product, and the need to do some contracted growing to make sure there's some guarantees. So like you heard here, I think there's a coalition of folks working together to make sure that we can advocate for, we can source private, state, federal funds to make sure that this program and other food sovereignty programs can continue forward. So it's very exciting that we have so many partners at the table here, but also in the audience and beyond.
Thank you.
Do we have other questions? Are we good? Well, thank you. Thank you. Now, we also have several, if you want to speak with some of the tribal elders that receive the food boxes, we will have them available. I see Jonesy Miller over here. I see Andy Bovine in the back. So we have several that can speak towards that. And I'm too young to speak to that. I'm not an elder yet. No, wait. Yeah, I erased that online. But at 1 o'clock, we also will have our elder food boxes right now. So they're outside. We're going to be asking Secretary Romansky if he will go outside and help load some of the boxes into the cars. So when they get the food boxes, they also, within that, receive a highlight on some of the producers and also some recipes in there that talk about how you could use the food, you know, good ways to cook it. And we had Chef Francisco, he demonstrated that to us before, and we had some really good food. So in the sustainability piece, yes, we're growing producers, and there are more, because this is here, there are more who are now deciding it's affordable for them, or here's our chance to get into the business. And it's happening on every reservation in Wisconsin. So I thank you all for being here, and Wawanan, to those who are online, thank you for being here. We very much appreciate this, and go Packers.